How are we all on this Monday night? Is it raining still? It's been really rubbish weather, hasn't it? We've had about 5 seasons in a week, haven't we? I've had autumn again, I've had winter, I've had snow, I've had hail, I've had rain, then I've had really nice sun, like it was spring. It's very confusing, like my state of mind at the moment. How are you all? What's been happening? Anything exciting? I'm just starting to get to this point now where I'm thinking, am I being hoodwinked into believing that Boris Johnson may secretly be a libertarian? It may all be over soon. Or is he just lulling me into a false sense of security so he can just whack me with further restrictions at some point? It's worrying me because I'm starting to have a respect because of the fact that I went to Belfast and it was really locked down there. And I'm like, ooh, maybe we are still Britain. For those of you in Britain, as in England, actually, what I'm saying, Britain. And maybe we are going to come out of restrictions at some point. Or is it just a cruel trick of the nudge unit? Who knows? Who knows, guys? Anyway, it's January, apparently the most depressing month in the year. I know that because I've just been asked to write a column on it from a Closer magazine that I do. So I'm like, well, we can't have that, can we? January cannot be the most miserable month of the year. I'm not having it. I'm not having it for lots of reasons. Number one, it's the start of a new year. Can't be any worse than the last 2 years. Point one, making it a better year because it wasn't last year or the year before, right? So anybody feeling a bit miserable, I know that some of you have been saying, you're getting a bit stuck at the moment, you're feeling a bit down, right? Well, first of all, reframe it. It's not last year or the year before. That's a bonus. So, number one. Number two, brilliant time for new stuff. I'm going to clear out my wardrobe. It's a very good thing to do. If you have not worn something for months, throw it away. Give it to a charity shop. I'm not even talking about somebody with a big budget or a small budget. Anybody can do it. You can always go and buy your own stuff from a charity shop. But buy stuff that you actually wear. Because genuinely, most people I know have loads of shit that they don't need. And you get a better state of mind when you clear it all up, get rid of it, make space. Because one of the other things that's really good in the new year, reinvention. Reinvention is something that I massively believe in. And I mean, reinvent the way that you look, reinvent the way that you think, even reinvent your attitude. Sometimes you need to reinvent the friends that you have around you as well. What I'm saying is January should not be a depressing month. It should be a clarity month, a getting rid of the old, bringing it in with the new, and a recognition of what needs to change. Also, I know that people talk about New Year's resolutions and everyone's like, why do we make them? They're really stupid. They're not. They're really good. Everybody should make resolutions, just not the kind of resolutions that people constantly fail at. So there is a scientific basis to making New Year's resolutions, or as I'm going to reframe them, goals. Let's just forget the words resolutions. Goals. The reason that you should have a goal is because people who have goals are more successful, happier, healthier, and tend to have better relationships than people who don't have goals, because you constantly feel like you are thriving and you are working towards something. So be specific with your goals. Do what I'm doing, for example. I'm doing 12, this was meant to start 2 years ago. I managed to get one of them done and then we went into lockdown. So I'm not saying that I caused the lockdown 2 years ago. I'm just saying that it seems weird that I made these amazing plans for the year and then that happened to thwart it. So anyway, this year, back on track, 12 things that either scare or challenge me. Everyone should do that, be specific. So I'm climbing Snowdon again this month so that we can start as we meant to go on 2 years ago. But then we're doing things like the biggest zip wire in Wales. Then we're going to be doing things like a parachute jump with my kids. There are all these different things that you can do. And arguably, everybody should set themselves 12 tasks. Also, if you have started to do this, I will get on with the questions in a minute, but I'm just giving you a bit of a lecture. Giving you a bit of a lecture at the beginning of this. The other things that you need to think about doing when you're making your goals is obviously be very specific. Also, as SMART targets suggest, be measurable so you can reflect on them and go, nice when I did that. Yeah? Make sure that they're achievable. Don't do this. I need to lose weight. I need to get fit. I need to completely revamp my diet. I need to meet a new partner. I need to move house and I need to get a new job by February. You'll fail. And that's before adding on, I need to give up smoking and drinking, which some of you might have as well. You're not going to be able to do all that. Take specifics and then work towards achieving one of them, right? and then make sure they're realistic. Like I said, that was unrealistic what I just said. And time bound is important, because if you give yourself a time frame, you know that you're working towards it, and you know that you've got to actually achieve it to make sure you're in line with those goals. So you can get a goal and you can break it into milestones. Lecture over. I will be checking on you. Actually, soon, with the way our society is going, I'll probably be able to, won't I? Probably be able to. I'll just be like, what's Gemma up to? What's Lucy up to? What's Sharon up to? And so on and so forth. I know. I'll be like that with my drones outside your house. Are they sticking to those? It's going to be like that in the end, isn't it? Mind you, saying that, if that's the case, I'll be in prison probably. Simple as that. They'll be dragging me off to the gulag or putting me in some camp, won't they? We've been seeing what she's been doing, and it's not in line with the government suggestions. Anyway, moving on. Also, first question to answer to somebody who got in contact before about feeling a bit like ugh at the moment, so a bit burnt out and stuff like that. So I said I'd cover that quickly. So there's a few things that I'd say about anybody who's feeling a dip in the way that they feel emotionally at the moment. Number one is you should always get checked out physically. I know that I am somebody who likes a natural approach to life. So as few medications as possible, try to stay fit and healthy, look after my body and all those things, yeah? But if you suddenly find yourself feeling kind of emotionally tired or a bit sad, and you suddenly get this drop in the way that you feel, I always suggest going and speaking to your GP, just getting some blood tests ran, only so you can exclude them. But you know, it could be that you're a bit low on B12, it could be that your iron's a bit low, it could be even that your hemoglobin's a bit low, because that actually happens as well. But also it can be that there's something associated with that. So instead of always just counting it out, if you really feel exhausted, all of a sudden a bit low, dead worth going to the GP. That's one of the things I do, just so you can exclude those issues. If it is that there's nothing wrong with you physically apart from the way that you feel, then there's a few things I'd be doing at this time of year. Number one is the more white light on your skin, the better. So I would get outside if you can, and it's hard for a lot of people when I say this, 90 minutes all the way to 2 hours if you can, getting outside in white light every single day. For some of you who are working in offices, that might mean you only get to do your dinner hour, so go out for the hour and just sit or walk in white light. If you can walk in it as well, you're getting your exercise, which is going to help. If you can get out for 2 hours, even if you're working from home and you can just set yourself up outside in a coat, and make sure your arms can be exposed to the sun, make sure your face can be as well, because white light is really powerful for regulating our melatonin in our brain, and that makes sure that we sleep better and rest better. And it also stops us wanting to eat everything that's starchy and sugary, because that's what happens in the winter months, isn't it? You're like, why do I feel like all I want to live on is donuts? That's the way it feels, because you're exhausted, because your body's craving all this stuff because you're not getting the right amount of vitamin D. That's what white light creates as well. It helps you absorb it, right? So they're things that I do. Also, if you're feeling like something's a bit this moment in time, it's good to sit down and acknowledge, okay, what's changed, what's shifted? Because sometimes there are some elements in our world that actually change and transition, and we might feel a bit bruised by certain circumstances. So that's another thing. Always explore what might have shifted and kind of take note of it, because that's how you create a strategy to make a change. And then I guess on top of that, it's about acknowledging that the past 2 years have been full of secondary trauma. A lot of us don't realise that. So secondary trauma is when we basically are traumatised by the back door, so to speak. Let's just say, I don't know, the MSM have tried to terrify us for the past few years and made us feel convinced that we might kill everyone that we love, and made us stay away from people that we need to be around, and put us in circumstances where we've been separated from people that we've adored who may have died, for example. Let's just throw those into the mix of possible experiences of not necessarily being able to feel in control of our world. But secondary trauma is more where you're reading about it, you're watching things, you're afraid of things that might happen that won't happen actually, but nonetheless it's been traumatizing. That can cause something called burnout. Burnout's really common in things like therapy, when you're working with, let's say, doctors in ICU who are working, and nurses, paramedics, army people, individuals who may not actually ever be in a situation where it happens to them, but they might be dealing with people it's happened to. That can be an experience of secondary trauma as well. But the point is, with these kind of burnouts, you just feel exhausted and really depressed a lot of the time, but it's not depression. It's really about needing to take time out, de-stress, kind of work through what it is that's yours and what it is you need to leave behind, and then just allowing yourself some rest and recuperation. And that's the final thing that I'd say as well. Christmas is a busy time. There's a lot of build up to it. There's a lot of expectations. A lot of us create hopes because we go back to being a child. So the thing about nostalgia and triggers is they're really powerful. So if you get to Christmas and you've had a really shitty childhood, well, your expectations actually won't be that big for it, which is horrible because you deserved a better childhood. But equally, if you're somebody who might have had a great childhood and with brilliant Christmases, well, there's something quite devastating at times when you get to be an adult and you're like, oh, right, it's never quite what I anticipated it would be like in my idealized standard of what Christmas would be like. And so that can also cause a bit of a drop afterwards because you're like, yeah, all the brilliant things that I thought was going to happen didn't happen because I'm actually playing out my child role. My inner child's kind of taking over. And arguably there will be some people who maybe have had horrible Christmases as kids or average ones and now create amazing ones, and you'll have a dip as well because there's nothing like not having what you really enjoyed and then having to wait another year for it. So anyway, that's all those possibilities are there. Clean your wardrobes out, throw stuff out, set some goals, get yourself organised, and also reframe. It's January, new year, new hope, see the back of the pandemic, a lot more people on the same page. We're not going to let it carry on. We are going to finally get back to a point and a semblance of normality because we're going to force it. Anyway, let's get on with this. I split up with my child's father who had BPD and was abusive. He now has a new partner and a baby on the way after 2 weeks. I still can't get over it and I have a 1-year-old. Okay. I'm going to struggle to understand how you split up with your child's father who has a new partner now with a baby on the way after 2 weeks. Physiologically, I'm struggling with that. I'm going to be honest with you. So I'm going to break that down a little bit. From your side, obviously there is nothing worse than going through a breakup at the best of times. You have a child, therefore you are connected to this person, and that can make even the most challenging or simple of breakups, always feel very tinged with grief because of the fact that you've got a child, and so you and he are inextricably linked for life, so to speak. And initially that can feel really overwhelming because in relationships, when they break down, a lot of the time we're just like, right, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to block them on every social media avenue possible so I never have to see them again. And it kind of allows you, I suppose, to decompress and detox from that experience. And that's really good. And it makes it easier and simpler. It's not like that for you. One, you have a child. There was great love there. Clearly, you've created this life. And secondly, even though you broke up with him, and I would imagine there were a whole range of reasons. Not just the fact that your partner had BPD, although I appreciate that probably meant that some of the emotional regulation in the relationship was a bit haywire, because whenever you're dealing with somebody who has a particular issue that adds some stress into the relationship, both good and bad at times, it's going to take quite a lot of your time. When that's gone, that's going to create quite a hole and space. But on top of that, the fact that he was abusive to you, so bullet dodged for the rest of your life in that capacity, and that's a reality. I'm glad he's not in your life. You deserve far better, as does your child. Child does not deserve to be brought up in a household where a parent is being abused by another parent. So I'm glad it's over. And that might seem like I'm being unfair to your feelings, but as is said, facts don't care about feelings. The fact of the matter is, you were raising your child in an unsafe arena, and now you're not, because you had the good sense. You ended the relationship. You chose your child and you over your relationship. That's brave. So you've made the right decision. You've made a courageous decision, because do you want your child growing up thinking it's acceptable to harm you? Do you want them growing up thinking that these kind of relational experiences are acceptable and carry them into their own relationships, or be the person who gets abused in their relationship because they've seen that as a prototype for potential of relationships? You don't want that. You made the right decision. What's happened is now your partner's with somebody else and the person's pregnant in a miraculous amount of time. And I'm really sorry to say that, but 2 weeks? How does that happen? When you have a period as a woman, there's then a 2-week period for you. This is what would have had to have happened, okay? You and he would have had to split up. He would have had to have literally either the day that you got split up, meet somebody. She would have had to have been ovulating at that moment in time. And then she'd have needed to wait a month before finding out she was pregnant. Because that's the way it kind of works, really. I mean, 2 weeks is like the very... No! Anyway, what I'm trying to say is I think you probably need to call into question the relationship with him and her. And I think that probably you suspect that there's been potentially been some adultery there, because it doesn't make physiological sense that she knows she's pregnant after 2 weeks. But nonetheless, he might be telling you that's the case, but you've had a child. So I imagine that you understand that yourself. And I'm probably thinking that you've probably done the maths and it doesn't add up either for you. So that's going to make you feel really bad, because you're like, well, maybe this guy was having a relationship with somebody else before me. You know, before we split up. And that's confusing. But that's all extraneous. All of that's extraneous noise. Like, say he was being unfaithful. Say he was somebody who was cheating on you. All that's irrelevant, because he was abusing you. So he's only adding to the abuse doing that. He's only being more disrespectful, even though it's hard to be when you're an abusive partner. So what I would say is, instead of thinking that you are grieving the relationship of who he is, acknowledge that what you're grieving is the future that you thought you might have had at some point with this person before they became the person they've become. And that's completely acknowledged by most relationship experts, that you're not necessarily grieving the person who's left, that you've thrown out. That was good sense. Well done. Your child will hopefully have a life now with a strong parent who's not going to let anybody else abuse them. And you'll make choices to invite the person into your life that you'll end up spending your life with based on the way that they treat you positively. And you won't accept anybody being negative to you, because that's not okay. And even if you think it's okay for you, it's not okay for your child. So you're going to make a decision for your child. But the fact that he's playing away, or that he's got somebody else pregnant, well, I would on one level be like, well, that's quite a determined point. I'm going to use that and say, well, he obviously wasn't invested in the relationship anyway. His behaviour shows that here, and his behaviour shows that there. You know, if it's such a situation where he can just go off and be with somebody else and get them pregnant very quickly, doesn't really say that you had the meaning that you deserve. So again, it just fundamentally connects you with that knowledge again, that you made the right decision. This is about you doing the right thing, and you've done it. And then finally, I would say to you that you're going to have some kind of relationship with him as a co-parent. But without a shadow of a doubt, you need to protect your child first and foremost. So you need to make sure that you feel safe with him. If you don't feel safe with him seeing your child, you need to speak to people like social services, get CAFCAS involved, do things that actually mean that you feel in control and in power of making your child safe. But time, and it's real cliche when people are like, time is a healer. It's not really a healer. It just gets you used to things. And then when you get used to things, it neutralizes the feeling to a position where you can move on. That will happen. But out there right now is somebody incredible, just waiting for you to emotionally be open to a relationship with them. The only thing that separates you and them is time. I would spend a lot of time on yourself now and your child, formulating a place and a position where you two can grow and thrive. I am glad you have thrown him out. You have done a brave thing. You have done the right thing. You are just scared. He's moved on, and you're like, oh my God, he's moved on. What if I never move on? Maybe it would have been easy being uncomfortable in this uncomfortable space forever because I know it. No, it's far better to be uncomfortable in this new space that is firstly safe, and secondly will become very comfortable in the end. And finally, we'll invite other people to be able to come into your world and offer you relationships that you deserve. Because a relationship does not thrive if it has abuse in it. And you cannot stay in a situation where your child is at risk. And I don't just mean physically, I mean at risk of seeing things that they shouldn't see. Hi Emma, I'm really struggling with self-harm. My friends and relatives struggle to understand and think I'm just attention seeking. I suffer with EUPD, but none of the things they suggest help. So first of all, EUPD for people is emotionally unstable personality disorder. So on one level, let's just put that to the side at the minute, because that really has a little bearing on the way that your family is reacting to you and the self-harm. Number two, you are doing it to some degree for attention, but that's not bad. I don't mean you're doing it for attention in the way that your friends and family are saying it, because there is this kind of bizarre thing in the UK. It's really in the UK that it happens, where people needing attention is seen as a bad thing. How is it bad to want attention when you're in pain? I don't get it. I almost feel like it's such a stigmatizing situation to be put in a place where when you need help, you physically need it, people are like, oh my God, look at them craving attention. It's like, damn straight they're craving attention. They're in horrible pain emotionally. Don't get me wrong. I know you don't cut yourself or scratch yourself or harm yourself because you are asking for people to notice. But I'm saying it's as a byproduct of you cutting. So for example, when I used to deal with third degree harmers, which are like straight down to the bone, etc., that was obvious for me to see. But they didn't do it for me to be given that. They didn't do it to just go, there you go, Emma, look how much pain I'm in. They did it in a place I could notice at times. Not everybody does. Some people do it on the legs and stomach. I appreciate that. You might be one of those. But even for those who just overtly do it, it's not because they're an attention seeker. It's that they are seeking to be noticed, that their agony is unbearable to a point where they have to do something horrible to themselves to manage their feelings, whilst also hoping to God that somebody may actually take the time to notice their struggle. Like, that isn't on them that's the problem. That's on the people around them if they aren't able to acknowledge that. I mean, that's something that the people around that individual should really work on, because people don't choose to do it to try to just be the center of attention. They do it because they're in incredible pain, and that's where you are. You're in pain. So secondly, having said that, families and friends are often terrible at knowing what to do. It's far easy to minimize and say, oh, you know what, it's not really a problem, they're just doing it because they're wanting some attention. Then you can underplay the gravity of the way that person feels and the gravity of their actions, and also the gravity of the impacts and implications for the future. Because any self-harmer is at risk to some degree of harming more dangerously, and so on and so forth. And we don't want that. We don't want you to get to a place where your harm has gone past a place where you're safe. So with your family and friends, there's a few things. First of all, I'd ask one or two of them, if you are close enough, to educate themselves a little bit. It can be really helpful to just get them to go online and actually find a site which is about self-harm, and help them to read about the fact that this isn't something that you're doing on purpose. This is something you're doing to manage the way that you feel. And it's incredibly challenging for you. And the problem is, the more stressed you feel, the more likely you are to harm, right? So if people around you are giving you the opposite of what's required, then that's going to promote that kind of behaviour, and we don't want that. We want to kind of reduce the stress so that we can reduce those symptomatic behaviours that are used and manifested to actually help cope with your self-harm. So that's what I do as well. On top of that, obviously with EUPD, you know as well as I do that at times, like, life will feel very overwhelming, and things that others might see as quite sensitive but manageable, you might see as overwhelming. So again, get them to understand your condition. And if you can't get them to understand your condition, then look at groups who can. And it might be going online and joining a self-help group for EUPD. It might be going in real life and meeting a support group for EUPD. Again, with the self-harm, similar. What is around you that can offer you some kind of support strategies where you can talk to other people? And I'm not talking about the pro-harm sites, as you know, I'm talking about the harm management. There's an app called Calm Harm as well, CALM Harm. And that's got some really nice strategies for managing harm, and again is done by clinical psychologists and helps people to really connect with how they can use alternative methods. But on top of that, I hope you get some therapy. And if not, I would hope that you would go and ask for some therapy of your GP. I know you'll be waiting a while, but it's worth it. But like I said, this feeling that you have about shame because the people around you are looking at you and saying, well, you're an attention seeker, or it's not really that serious, like, that's their problem. It's not yours. It's not on you to make the world accept you at all costs. it's really hard, that learning to let go of other people's beliefs about you, learning to let go about the judgments that people make. It's really challenging. Look, it takes a long time to work through that. But truth be told, the only people that really matter in your world are the people who truly connect and understand you and are willing to get to know you in a way where it's authentic and where they can transparently acknowledge and accept who you are without you feeling that it's a game of whether you let them down this time or whether you're enough that time, and so on and so forth. So like, look at the people in your world and then try to select just a couple who you can invite into the world that you inhabit. And also at the same time, try to let go of some of those needing to be accepted and acknowledged and respected in a way that you might wish to by members of your family and friends who just don't have that capacity to do it in the way that's going to be effective for you. And that desensitizing yourself to other people's opinions can take a long time, but it begins when you're just like, I'm going to like me a bit more. Even with things like EUPD, where it's more challenging and where you've got self-harm, which again adds another layer of challenge, it doesn't mean that you can't start working on that liking yourself. Because if you always respond and react to a world because of the way that people make you feel about yourself through their eyes, then you're always going to lose. You're always going to feel like you're failing because you'll always look for people who reflect you negatively. We don't really go for the positives that often in life. Our brain's actually hardwired to look more for the negatives. It's a survival mechanism. So the more that you kind of do that, you'll always find out of 10 people, one person will look at you negatively. It's just the nature of human beings, maybe more. So you have to kind of pull back from that and be like, okay, what is it about me that's great? Like, what is it about me that's amazing? What is it about me that I really like? And it might start small. I remember working with a woman, she had horrific body dysmorphia. And I can still remember the exact words. We went through everything when we talked about the negatives, and she listed her negatives, and the list went on for a long time. It was like quite an exhaustive list. It wasn't even like she took a breath. She just went on and on and on and on about how awful everything was. And then I asked her to tell me a positive, and it took about 15 minutes. And in about 15 minutes, she just went, in the end, I think my skin's nice. And that was enough. That was where we started. That was exactly where it began. I think I've got nice skin. That was all we needed. Because the moment we've got one positive, we can amplify it. You know, in that case, it's easy to say, well, skin's all over your body. There's a huge amount of skin there. So that's incredible, isn't it? The fact that you've got a whole covering in this lovely skin that you acknowledge is something that people like and that you like. And it's kind of taking those micro details and expanding them. So I think you need to probably do some work on what makes you special, what makes you unique, and to stop apologizing for being alive, which is what a lot of people do when they've got mental health issues. Just this sense that they're too big, too loud, too overwhelming for the world, that they have to like play small to make everybody else feel comfortable. It's like, blow that out. Forget it. I'd rather have one friend who really loves me. I'd rather have one partner who accepts me above another 50 people out there who tell me I'm great. Forget it. I'd rather have the authenticity of a relationship full of who we really are and accepting of all our foibles and problems and idiosyncrasies, and so, you know, all of those that come with it that make me weird and quirky. I'd rather have that than be acceptable. And believe me, like, it's not an easy process. You know, the last few years for me has been a shedding of the skin and accepting that, you know, I don't have to be liked by everybody. I always used to think I had to be liked by everybody. Forget it. Like, why would I? Why do I want to be liked? There are trolls out there. There are people in the media who go out of the way to pull you down. There are blue ticks who attack you, who are meant to be, you know, decent human beings and stuff. Like, why? Why would I care about those people? But I used to. Like, it's a really important shedding of the skin when you start realizing that pleasing those people who are really quite nasty, you know, who like deriding people. I'm not going to waste a second worrying about their opinions. Like, think about it like that. If you only get one or two people in your life that are truly connected to you, that you haven't given birth to, for example, then that's good enough as long as you put the energy in there. That's what I'd say. Oh, can you please give one tip? Could you please give one tips? Oh, I like that. Could you please... Yeah, I know. Could you please give some tips? Oh, I thought it was, could you please give one tips? But it was actually, could you please give some tips, which is like less posh, really. So there you go. I had you as landed gentry there. Could you please, Emma, could you please give some tips? I'm wondering whether hockey's my bag. I'm not saying that very rich people play hockey or that they say hockey's my bag. It would be lacrosse, wouldn't it? Lacrosse my bag. Polo. Anyway, could you please give some tips on where to start inner child work? Need to know how to do this. I've been in therapy for 4 years, but I don't know where to even start, and I'm finding it hard. Okay, so you've been in therapy 4 years. It's great to go to therapy. I am an integrative therapist, and I don't work very long term with people because I kind of like people spending a certain amount of time and then feeling that they're equipped enough to kind of go off. It doesn't mean that people won't come back occasionally, have a few sessions, but like 4 years is more psychotherapy, where it's kind of long term and very engrossed, and it can be great. But obviously for you, you've got a certain place, but you don't feel like you're getting to that next level, or the therapy that you've got isn't giving you that opportunity. So a lot of people think therapy is the same. They hear about lots of different titles, but they imagine that therapy is sitting in a chair, conversing with a person who's a practitioner, right? That's what a lot of people think that therapy is. Same with psychologists, therapists, anything. It's just sitting down, having that conversation with somebody, and that individual navigating with you on a journey, and hopefully you come into some conclusions and working through some difficult stuff. Or you might be somebody who just likes therapy because you can go and unload, and you're not even going in a direction, you just use it as a self-coping mechanism, right? That's not necessarily a lot of therapy. So you might be like that, or you might be a schema therapist. So you may work a lot on your modes, like what kind of a mode are you in? And there are different modes in schema therapy. And a lot of that can look at the coping strategies that are formed in childhood and so on and so forth. So schema therapy might be something that'd be really effective for you. And then there's the kind of inner child work that I would do. And as an integrative practitioner who's got 3 different disciplines of therapy, as well as my original training and my master's, this in itself is still something that I would say is still formulated in the integrative area of therapeutic paradigm. So with inner child work with me, it's much more about acknowledging that every single one of us remains the same human being that we've been from birth to death. As we're a child, we fundamentally learn some very powerful lessons. And those lessons are things that can work for us or against us. And often they work against us, if I'm honest. Very few of us are blessed enough to be born in the right postcode, to the right parents, with the right opportunities. We're rarely, as far as I'm concerned, born incredibly academic. Certainly I wasn't. Therefore, school can be really trying. And even if you happen to have all of those variables in place, then there are peers who slag you off or don't let you play with them. And then again, we're forming fundamentally all these relationships with the world around us whilst we're developing as a human being. And whilst our brain is developing and often feeling highly overwhelmed. So no one teaches us, at least they haven't done, and certainly the education system doesn't seem to do it yet. Nobody really teaches us how to become a robust, resilient young adult. We kind of go through the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and eventually stagger into adolescence and then crawl into our 20s. And then hopefully by 30, we might know a little bit about ourselves. By 40, hopefully a bit more. And then, pretty much by death, we should have figured some stuff out. I don't know. But the inner child work is very much about acknowledging that there's a lot of pain. Like a lot of us right now, we might be 15, 25, 35, 45, 65. If you actually take a moment and look back at some of the most challenging of times in your life, and let's put to the side things like losing a loved one, that's always going to be challenging no matter where we are in our lives. But, if we actually think about what we formulate our attitude towards ourselves. So I do an exercise in therapy where I actually get people to actually physically remove clothes. Not like, that sounds so wrong. And that's how I got struck off. No, I get them to, there's loads of exercises you can do. But actually to wear lots of different items and to give baggage away and to label it, to be that's Mr. Pritchard, who was actually one of my teachers, who bullied me incessantly in junior 2 and made me feel really, really stupid and terrified me and told me that I was never going to be anything but a failure, and I'm not that, and I'm going to give it back. So a lot of inner child work can work like that. Another one is when you realize that the inner child is directing your life. So we talk about agency. The qualities that make us really happy, healthy human beings, or at least content human beings, is resilience and agency. And we talk about resilience quite a lot. The classic example is you fall off the horse, you get back on again, right? So that's an example of resilience. It's not actually. It's not. Resilience would go like this. You fall off the horse, you hit the ground, you hurt yourself. You check out, first of all, where you hurt to make sure that it's safe to get back on the horse. Then you figure out why you fell off the horse. You make sure that your stirrups are in the right position. You make sure your saddle is tight enough. You make sure that you feel that the horse is in a situation where getting back on is going to be safe enough. You then get back on the horse and you go and you make sure that you hold tighter, keep yourself in check. And then as you gallop, concentrate on the fact that you've achieved that goal by returning to the situation and realizing you survived it. That's resilience, where you kind of do the work. The other one is agency. You happen to the world does not happen to you. Most people, when I go and train them, I've not done it for a few years really, apart from online, because essentially I've not been allowed to leave the house very often. But I did used to go down to Goldman Sachs, Mayer Brown, Pinsent Masons, all the big traders and lawyers in London, and do trainings in things like work-life balance and being positive and lots of things about resilience. And I used to walk into a room where people earned probably 40 times what I earn. Literally, these people are very, very wealthy. And I would be like, how many of you actually plan to be here? Like, how many of you really feel that this was your decision to actually be in this room, in this space, doing this job? And out of a room of like 100, you might get 10 who'd be like, yeah, this was it. This was the dream. And then the other 90, they were like, now that means they haven't got agency. It doesn't mean that they're not successful. It doesn't mean that they're not brilliant. It doesn't mean they're not bright. It means they haven't got agency. They haven't planned to be. They haven't happened to the world. They've been reacting to it. So my job is to help people understand psychologically that when you have agency, as in, this is my plan, I'm working to it, I'm working on it, I'm working through it, and I'm going to get there. I might be here now, but I know where I'm going. That's agency, and agency and resilience are brilliantly in bed together, so to speak. So the inner child stuff, often the child is still driving the car, as I say it. So very often, we've not realized that the reason we're being a bit chaotic, or we're sabotaging things, or life isn't going quite right because we keep shrinking from being courageous, or we keep putting our foot in things in the wrong space and then really regretting doing it, and so on and so forth. Often it's not because we're doing anything other than letting our child still control who we are, because we haven't told that child that we've grown up, that we don't need them anymore. They're just doing their best. The little you is protecting the big you because they don't realize the big you's big, and you haven't done that work to tell them that it's time to settle. So in that inner child work, I'll often kind of help the person to manifest that child, and to then we go and put them in a lovely safe space. We put them to bed in a really beautiful, I've got my little Emma, who's very chaotic and mischievous and is not allowed out of her bedroom. She's very happily sleeping somewhere in a little light by the side of the bed, and it's very beautiful, and she's safe, and she doesn't need to look after me anymore. She did a really good job. She got me where I needed to go, and I don't need her to do that anymore because she needs to accept that she did a really good job. Yeah, there was complete chaos and mayhem because like 8-year-olds should definitely not drive cars or be allowed to go to a pub. But the point is, by working on that and working through it, it helps you to kind of make peace with that. A lot of us are dealing with the shame and the failures and the lies that people told us about ourselves, and the baggage that we've been told to carry because all these bastards said nasty stuff to us when we were growing up, and we decided that we'd believe it. Nobody tells you that you shouldn't believe it. No one. I used to do a really good exercise with teenagers. I used to work with really traumatized kids and teenagers, but then as I started to do my media stuff, I'd often get invited to go and do talks at schools. And so I would go into schools where they were nice schools and the young people were thriving, so to speak. I used to do an exercise with the older teens, and it was all about groups, and it was all about popularity. And I used to help them understand that all the groups that they think are popular are all terrified equally of not being what they consider to be popular and fitting in, no matter what group they were in. And that even the kid that everyone thought was popular is actually really struggling with the idea of what happens if they're not popular and struggling to see whether they are actually popular themselves. So all these groups of people that everybody thinks is thriving and all these young people are just really popular and everything's fine, they're all terrified and no one has that conversation. I can remember the room would always be like this massive sigh of like, oh, hang on, everyone feels like this? Everyone's freaking out a bit. Everyone's scared. No one really knows where they fit in. And it's like we form our identification with life and with our experience in this world when we're kids. So inner child work really helps to kind of grow you up. And there are some great schema therapists out there, which is a good one. Transactional analysis can be a really good one as well to look at. But the main thing with inner child is just to be like, okay, what formed me? You know, what are the messages that I still carry? Because like, I've done a lot of work around letting that stuff go. Because a lot of people will say, I really don't care what other people think about me, but they're lying a lot of the time because they haven't really done the work. But when you do get to a point where you can say, I will always care about what people say to me if I think they have a real point, and I will listen to that because that's important. If there are people giving me messages and when I really reflect on them, there is a reasoning behind that message and it seems like it's based on pretty good evidence that they may have a point, then I'm gonna absolutely listen. But if it's just that they're saying stuff about me, or they're being nasty to me, they're calling me names, or they're saying I'm not very good at this, and I don't believe it, I'm gonna choose my opinion. That's a really powerful place to get to, but only the adult can do that because the child is wounded. The child is afraid, the child is bullied, the child is angry, the child is all those things that we learn early on as defense mechanisms to survive. And then when you get older, you're like, I don't need them. I don't need to get into conflict with anybody. The only way I can have an argument is if I join in. But I don't think they're right. I don't even need to acknowledge it. My husband and me have this conversation quite a lot. You know, somebody looked at him the other day and was really quite nasty because he wasn't wearing a mask. And his response was to try to explain away why he wasn't wearing a mask. Mine was, they've got no right to ask. Just ignore them. They're not worth it. Just ignore them. Because I don't want to engage. I don't want to waste my energy. Deal with your purple beard, mate. Do you know what I mean? There's always a comeback you could say that's nasty. But it's like, let's not do that. Your opinion means nothing to me. It doesn't have to. Conflict and arguments are a two-way street. So you can always choose to stand to the side of those things. Pete isn't quite there yet, my lovely husband. He's trying to. He's not quite there yet. See, even living with me, I can't force him. Can't force you, can I, Pete? You're trying, though. He looks like a 1970s dad today, though. How to get past writer's block. Ooh, well, this is interesting. It's a really interesting question. I'd like to know what your book is. Get in touch with me and be like, oh, my book's on how to get past writer's block. That would be ironic, wouldn't it? Sorry, I'm not taking the mic. I'm just saying. It'd be ironic if it was like, oh, my book's on how to get past writer's block. So, the thing about therapeutic work is, as much as the block is deeply frustrating, I would be interested. I've actually worked, it's a long time ago now. It's 20 years since I worked with, it's 19 years actually, since I worked with the most amazing poet. And he had writer's block. And it was actually during his PhD, it was his thesis. And he was one of the most beautifully eloquent human beings I've ever met. What a joy to work with. And much of our therapy involved him starting to write poems, in fact, to move through that block, to actually work it through. And my position is now as my position was then, which is, what does the block represent? Everything in our life has a payoff. Every single thing. Every action, even the ones that are negative, that we carry on doing, there's a payoff. There's a reason why we continue it. And that can be really difficult to kind of comprehend when it's not working. We're like, why would I choose to have writer's block, right? Now, again, like I said earlier on, about if you're exhausted and so on and so forth, you should always get checked out. If there's something that's changed within you and you're like, oh, actually, I don't feel myself, you should always go to the doctors and just make sure that everything's in check, just because you don't want to be dealing with something that's physical that is impacting on things like your ability to sustain thought. But let's throw that to the side now and let's just deal with your block. So when we're writing something, There are lots of different reasons that we choose to go on a path, for example, whether it's at university or writing a book and so on and so forth. But usually when we get block, it's because we're using that as a position of stopping. So there's a few things. You might arguably have got to a point where your body's saying, we need to just take a step back. We've not been looking after ourselves. We've not been eating well. We've not been making sure that we're nutritionally we're fed well. We've not been drinking enough water. We've not been getting enough sleep. We've not been doing enough exercise. So your body just goes, right, okay, well, until you're willing to acknowledge what it is that you need to change, we're not going to go any further. So first of all, do yourself a little health spectrum. Is your body literally going, we're going to stop this? And for a lot of you out there who get physically sick when they know that they should have taken a break from work, and then you get to the holiday and you just get really ill. And your body's like gone, right, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to slow you down. We're going to get sick and then you're going to have to stop. That happens a great deal, right? So the payoff, however, is whilst you're working 24/7, you feel worthy, noticed and valuable because of the fact that your employer's like, oh, great, look, Jen is working 24/7 again. And then you get to the holiday and you're like, ugh. But the emotional payoff was that you got noted as a hard worker, busy bee, right? With writer's block, aside from the physical that I've just said, if you are exhausted and your body's stopping you, in which case you need to listen to that, it could also be, what does the block represent? Like, what is it? What do you feel stuck in? Like, what needs to shift? And also remember, being stuck always comes before progression and growth. And instead of fearing it, which is what a lot of people do, you're like, oh my God, I've got writer's block. I'll never be able to do this. It will never happen. Like, stop that. Just drop it. What if the block is just about acknowledging that in this moment, it's not meant to happen? You've got to gestate something. Something's got to change within you, in your state, in your mind, before you can move forward. And instead of fighting it because you've got a deadline, just be still for a while. Just be still. The block, we often see it as a block when we have writer's block. It's just a formation of something brewing. And instead of fighting it, and sitting there and beating yourself up, just take a step back, put your book down, put your work down, and just say, I'm not going to touch that. I'm going to give myself a few days where I just like literally let myself think about other stuff, because the block may be that you are not choosing to deal with something else that is more important. It might be something emotional, it might be something relational, it might be something to do with your bigger, wider world picture. There's something else and you aren't confronting it. So what your brain has done is said, well, we're not going to do this until we consider this. But you can't do that until you create space. So the block requires stillness, space, gestation, and a willingness to reflect on the possibility that there is something bigger that needs to be explored. And then I suppose you could argue on the flip side, there is a bit potentially within you that is also scared of finishing whatever it is that you're doing. So it could be, and again, just to go through all possibilities, that one of the problems that you have is you're thinking, what next? So what does this symbolize? When you come to the end of this, is it about, let's say it was a thesis, finishing your thesis? What next? Let's say it is a book. What next? What if I don't sell any? What if they don't like it? So on and so forth. So what are the fears that extend in your mind when you think about completing the project? Because sometimes it's the fear of that that makes us go, all right, we just won't do it, and then we don't have to worry, so the defense mechanism pops up. So I've had to cover all angles of that. Use the one that applies most to you, or try them all out is what I'd say. How do we conquer loneliness as we get older? I'm single in my 30s and my friends have partners, and sometimes I'm struggling with feelings of isolation. First of all, the word older and 30 or 30s distresses me. You're incredibly young. But I remember that I've worked with a lot of people who used to see 30s as like some kind of like, this is it, I'm a spinster. Or, I'm a bachelor forever. It will never happen for me. It's like, I get it. That's the voice of convention That's not reality, like genuinely not reality at all. So first of all, reframe your idea of what the 30s symbolize. Yes, you have friends who have conformed and they've gone with the standard, and that's normal, you know. We have a stereotype because it's what lots of people do. So in your case, it is that your friends have met people and settled down, right? But the 30s is often the place where, firstly, we know ourselves better. Secondly, it takes a lot less time when we meet somebody and really fall for them because we know ourselves in a way that we didn't know ourselves in the 20s. And actually for you, when you meet the person that is going to be right, if you want somebody in your life that way, then you'll be a lot more discerning about it. So there are a lot of positives that you can take. And a lot of people in the 20s who get married get divorced by 30. So you, to some degree, have made choices that sound like you are discerning and diligent about what you want. So that's a great thing. Secondly, right, I do appreciate that sometimes when I say things, it could be taken like I'm judging, and I'm really not. But I have a limited amount of time and I want to get it across. When I say that loneliness is a volunteer position, I don't mean that you're doing anything wrong by being in it. I'm saying that instead of seeing loneliness as something that is just the way it is, I use the word volunteer position because you can change it, right? You can. So loneliness is indeed prompting you to do that. When you feel lonely and isolated, you're not going to stay there. Your emotional prompt is saying, I need connection. I need to do things that are going to mean that I don't feel that sense of loneliness within. It's telling me, it's informing me. So the fact that you're feeling lonely and isolated at times, which is great because it sounds like at times you're perfectly all right, but you're just noticing, and that's good as well. You're choosing to notice, what is that feeling? Oh, that feeling feels like I'm lonely. I feel isolated and my friends are doing things that I'm not doing because they're with partners, and this is informing that maybe I'm ready. Maybe it's time for me to really think about a partner. That's great. So you acknowledge the feeling, you recognize the prompt, now you put it into action and you do something positive about it. A few different things. First off, I know people are like, oh my God, the dreaded internet dating. But you know what? As long as you're not going for some like terrible site and you do think about dating a proper there's eHarmony, isn't there? That's like clinical psychologists profile you for like 100 years. Believe me, the forms take ages. I've worked with eHarmony years ago. But the point is, you can get sites that the people are looking for a relationship. And that will give you an interest because you'll be kind of like looking at potential dates, and it will also give you some confidence about the fact that you're connecting with people. And essentially at the same time, hopefully, it will lead you to meeting somebody, whether it's a short-term relationship or a long-term relationship, but giving you that kind of impetus that there are people out there like you looking for an opportunity to connect. Then I would also think about expanding your social horizons, because when you're on your own, you do need to do things with other people who get that, who are single. So what kind of interests and passion projects have you got? Most of us have got secret passion projects. It might be amateur dramatics. It might be going and doing life painting. It might be just taking some risks, doing some energetic new experiences. It might be learning more about you and going to some kind of support groups or self-help groups around particular interest areas like confidence. It really doesn't matter. The point is, get out there, and Meetup is a great app. You know, that's a good example. You go on Meetup, you find people who reflect you, you go into the groups, you meet new friends. It stops you feeling as disconnected. It gives you new horizons. It connects you with people who are also single, which is really handy because then you can go out together. And most importantly, it reminds you of who you are now, not who you were then. And I often say that. It's another thing that I'd say before I end. Big thing that can make a positive difference to most of us, if not all of us. But I know that some people are really socially phobic, and I know that some people are that because of particular spectrum disorders, for example. So the idea of like everybody just loving socializing is just a myth, and I don't want to use it as a whole. It's, you know, the majority of people can benefit from what I'm going to say now. Everybody has a reflection, but most of our reflections have been formed and forged by years and years and years of being around people who know us. And sadly, that makes the vision, the reflection, corrupted. Because, you know, if you know somebody who was 15 and now you're 40, well, you still remember that person at 15. It's really hard to look at the person who you hung out with. So I've got one of my best mates, Trish. Whenever I see her, she's still going to be my 13-year-old mate. She's still going to be the person who smoked fags and, you know, drank sherry because we thought adults bought that and that was the thing we'd get from the off licence. And let me tell you, it's not a good choice at 13 and 14. It's very sweet and it makes you violently sick and it's very strong as well. But nonetheless, that was the kind of way that our relationship was like. And now, even though she's like really successful financial woman, and I can't not see that. She's always going to be Trish, the girl who's, you know, had to speak to a police officer because she fell over in front of him when she was very drunk on sherry and then was violently sick. I'm always going to see it that way, even though she's a grown-ass woman, right? So my reflection is a corrupted one. Yeah, it's fun and we love each other and it's great. It doesn't interrupt our relationship now. But I can't see her as the grown-up. Like, she's Trish. If I want to see myself as my grown-up self, I meet somebody new. I go to something where they don't know me and I get a reflection of who I am. And you know what? It's really great because very rarely do we realise how much changing we've done and shifting we've done and how great we've become as a human being. And like, we're all imperfect. I mean, you know, I'm a dinted tin every day of the week, but there's something really igniting about just chatting to people who don't know you and they're like you and they want to hang out with you. And if they don't, then that's great because that gives you some food for thought. And there are all these great things that come from new opportunities and hobbies and interests. And we stop doing it as adults. It's really annoying. There are some people who don't. There are some people who are just like, itineraries out. Just like 365 days a year, they've got it. And they're great, you know, and it's amazing seeing those people. But I don't buy into the fact that most of us do that. My God, I advise people to just go walking and eat a more healthy diet. And you'd say a lot of people are like, that's too much, it's too overwhelming. You know, life is busy. So a lot of us will put these things on the back burner. I'm saying that if you really want to truly get to know yourself, who you are now, get some uncorrupted visions and reflections from people who've never met you before. And again, that's great for dealing with solitude and isolation in the most positive of ways because you're kind of meeting the need and you're also giving yourself that confidence. It's really interesting when you see people do that. I often see people start thriving when they start going to 2 or 3 new things a month and they're like, God, I really like me. Same when people have a breakdown in a relationship. One of the first things and advice pieces I always give is go and do something completely new. Meet a group of people completely new because you think that you've lost something by this relationship ending. You won't have. Like literally, you'll have become something new through it. And when you then go and put the pieces of the puzzle back into pieces of the puzzle back into the picture, you'll find there are extra pieces because you're not the person you were before the relationship. And so then the relationship that you've lost ultimately has got massive worth because you've developed and grown and changed and shifted and people will like you for that. So the multifaceted growth of who we are is a lifetime coming. And we can only really fully adapt to that knowledge when we meet people who reflect that point in time. So we need to keep doing it again and again and again and again. And in the end, hopefully when we take our last breath, we have that many current visions that we truly got to know ourselves. Because part of getting to know yourself is self to self and the identity that we have with growing and changing and learning and shaping and reflecting and all those things. And part of it is through another person's eyes who can check us with our behaviour and with our personality in the moment that we're experiencing it. So that's why it's important, as opposed to just staying all the time with the same set of friends. Not that that's not a great worth to, that's brilliant, but just you need other friends who come into your life. And these kind of moments where you find yourself alone and single and so on and so forth, they can be the most awakening of times because they create space and time and opportunity to do that. Cool, guys. I will see you next Monday. And if you want to join my crime thing on a Wednesday and Wednesday and Sunday, I'm just inventing a new day. Now Friday? I don't do them on a Friday. Wednesday and Sunday. Well, it's 7 o'clock each time. I release my content religiously, so come and join me on my YouTube crime if you fancy it. See you next week, chaps. Take care.